This program is presented by University of California Television. Like what you learn? Help others discover UCTV podcasts by leaving a comment or rating for us in iTunes.
My name is Dave Austin. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute for Energy Efficiency at UC Santa Barbara, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this very important lecture. This is one of a series of lectures that the Institute provides with the purpose of reaching out to the community, both the UCSB community and also the Santa Barbara community, to stimulate a dialogue about the key issues of importance in our day related to energy and sustainability. And our speaker today is an outstanding example of someone to address those very issues. Also very timely. Some of you may have noticed that there was a report released just today, the third assessment commissioned by the President Barack Obama on the impact of climate change on the U.S. If you haven't had a chance to read it, I recommend you do. Not all 800 pages. I can't say I read the whole document myself, but it is a very important document. The program today will consist of a couple of parts in particular. Tom wants this to be, most of all, a discussion. He's going to speak for a period of time, but then it will be followed by an extensive Q&A session. And to facilitate that, we'd like you to write your questions on the cards that were given to you when you came in and pass them along the aisle. Our student ushers will pick them up and bring them to John Bowers, the director of the Institute, who will coordinate the Q&A session with Tom. And if you didn't get a card, please just put your hand up and one of the ushers will get you one now. For this event, we're pleased that to partner with the Carsey Wolf Center, which has generously made available this beautiful Pollock Theater. In addition, we're grateful for the support and assistance of many people who made this event possible, including Deans Rod Alferness, Pierre Wilsius, UCSB Office of Institutional Advancement, the Institute staff, and Tom Steyer's team at NextGen. And most of all, to Marcy Carsey, who approached Tom and extended our invitation to him to speak. I'd like to now introduce Marcy Carsey, who will introduce Tom. It's no coincidence that we're in the Carsey Wolf Center's Pollock Theater, and that one of the primary initiatives of the Carsey Wolf Center is environmental media, a topic that's a major element of Tom Steyer's action-oriented approach to changing behavior regarding climate change. Marcy is currently the chair of the UC Santa Barbara Foundation Board of Trustees. Now retired, she was a partner with Tom Werner in the Carsey Werner Company, the television production company responsible for The Cosby Show, Roseanne, Third Rock from the Sun, The 70s Show, and many others. She was inducted into the Hall of Fame of the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences and has received numerous awards, including the Emmy, the Peabody Award, the People's Choice Award, the Golden Globe, and many others. She is considered the most successful independent television producer of comedy of all time. Marcy is the parent of two UC Santa Barbara graduates, Becky and John. And as I said, we're most grateful for her support and for extending the invitation to Tom. So now I'd like to call on Marcy to come up and introduce our speaker today.
You have a bio of Tom in your hands, so I'm not gonna tell you much about him. He, had a really successful career as an investment career. He founded Farallon, and he was just, terrific career. He's a smart guy. Now he's using the resources that he's so beautifully gained over his life to do extraordinary things. Extraordinary things. I mean, he believes the biggest problem, I think he believes this, is energy. The biggest thing in need of solutions is energy. And so he has set about to solve those problems that are energy-based. And so he runs Next Gen Climate. He has put a lot of resources and energy and time into dealing from an idealistic point of view, but with a pragmatic approach. So God help the politician who's a climate change denier, because Tom's coming for you, you know. And there's something about Tom that is like, I think he's interested in energy because he is a human source of energy that I've never seen the likes of. I mean, there's something turbo-like burning inside him that he's unstoppable. So don't ever bet against him. Do read his bio because it's fantastic, and it's not only energy. Any problem that he sees that needs a solution, he will find a pragmatic and practical and really effective approach to solving that problem. He's created an institution that gives loans to underserved small businesses. He's into children's policies that affect energy policy. It's just anything Tom touches is gonna move. He's gonna move the world along. He's gonna move society along, and he's gonna do it no matter what. So he is a force of nature, and I'm privileged and pleased to know him and to introduce him to you today. Tom Steyer.
So, of course, that was way too nice. Marcy, thank you very much, but I think you're going to figure out how over the top that introduction was in about a minute. I am Tom Steyer. Really what I hope this will be, to a large extent, is a chance to talk back and forth and answer questions. But before we get to that, I thought I'd give you a little preamble about why I'm doing what I'm doing, and a little bit about how I see the energy problem in the context in the United States and globally. I was, as Marcy said, an investor for 30 years. We invested all over the world. We invested in everything, and we primarily invested for endowments and foundations. And at the time, I was, absolutely passionate about trying to do it as well as possible, and to do it as straightforwardly as possible. And I went on the board. What really happened was I went on the board of Stanford University. And in thinking about Stanford, I was trying to decide what I could do, what Stanford could do that would be significant, that would really make a difference. And the funny thing is, what I thought that needed to happen was for them to lead the way from a technological standpoint in energy. Because I could see that we had this huge problem in terms of climate, and it seemed to me that if there was a technological fix, that would be the thing that Stanford could do that they weren't doing really, and that could be a way for them to distinguish themselves and have a real impact in the world. And the funny thing is, as I've discovered, a university that really is doing this, has been doing this, and is fantastic at that is UCSB. But nonetheless, I did my best to push Stanford along those lines, and in doing so, I learned a lot about the topic. And what I learned was that as an investor, what you see politically is that in the United States, problems come up. And there is a lot of talk, and there's a lot of argument, and people, wrangle and yell, and then basically come together and come up with a solution that's usually pretty good. And if you look back really to how this has happened in the United States, starting with the Santa Barbara oil spill in 1969, people sit there and realize we have a big problem. After the Santa Barbara oil spill, 20 million people come out for Earth Day. after Earth Day, people start to think about what they really need to do. And in a Republican administration, we get the EPA, the Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species Act, the Clean Water Act, and in California, we get CEQA and the Coastal Commission. That's the normal American way to do things. We perceive a big problem. We think about it really hard. A lot of people put their voices in, and we come up with solutions. And it's the funny thing that seemed to me to be going on in this case was we have a big problem, and we weren't coming up with solutions. And that's really what I learned in working through this problem, reading about it, trying to research how to have some impact. So after I got involved through Stanford, I got a chance to co-chair a no proposition in 2010, which was No on 23, which for those of you who were around in 2010 was basically a defense of California's energy laws, which are the most progressive of any major government in the world. We have more progressive energy laws than Europe. We have more progressive energy laws than really any place in the world. And there was a prop on the ballot basically to roll them back. And because I was naive, I thought it would be a good thing, and I co-chaired it with George Shultz, so one Republican, one Democrat, a chance. And it gave me a chance to really learn how the politics of energy work. Because traditionally in California, in propositions, when you had a proposition that pitted business interests against environmentalists, traditionally the business interests, took us to the cleaners. And so what we were trying to do in 2010 was to say we want a completely different way of thinking about this. We want to do a completely different framework. We're going to have different messages, different messengers, and a different coalition. So we basically said we need to have a business voice here. We need to talk about jobs. We need to point out that really any kind of progressive energy policy is going to be good for business. We need to talk about health. We need to talk about what the citizens of California, how their lives and their families are going to be affected. And we need to talk about what these companies are trying to do to you. And then we need the messengers to be credible. So when we talked about health, we didn't put me up there. We put the head of the American Lung Association up there. Because when the American Lung Association talks about health, people think they might be telling the truth, since that's the only thing they've worried about for the last 40 years. And when you talk about jobs in the energy context, you want to have people from business talk about it. Because Californians are smart, and they know when business people talk about jobs, they're talking about being able to meet a payroll at the end of the week, having a strategy, knowing what can really happen. They have credibility. And in terms of a coalition, we really didn't want to have the traditional environmental coalition. The traditional environmental coalition in California, and we are a really progressive state, isn't nearly big enough to win here. So we basically want a coalition, the number one group in California and in the United States that believes in the environment, that cares about progressive energy policies, that will vote that way consistently, is Latinos. Number two group, Asian Americans. Number three group, African Americans. So when you think about the coalition, when you think about winning elections, it is not the traditional coalition that people think of as the environmental coalition is not actually the one that wins. And in 2010, we had a lot of good luck on our side, genuinely. And so a lot of things broke our way, but we won 70-30. And so we felt, rightly or wrongly, I mean, George Shultz is the smartest 93-year-old I have ever met. He was also the smartest 92, 91, 90, and 89-year-old. And he said at the beginning, and he's obviously a Republican, he's had 4 cabinet positions, and he said basically, we need to win, and we need to win in a big way to make our point, that there's something different about what we're going to do. And George is a forceful guy, and he was right. So he and I also did another one in another proposition in 2012, using a lot of the same tactics in California, having to do with closing a tax loophole and using it for environmental retrofits in the schools, which we won 60%, which maybe the trend isn't so good, but the outcome still counts. And then at the end of 2012, I quit my job. And the reason I did that was that what Marcy said is true. I actually think that it's fairly typical in the United States for a generation to have a big challenge. And if you think back through American history over the last 200 years, I always joke and say to people, if your family was here in 1873, do you remember where they stood on the big tariff debate of 1873? And of course, no one knows if there was a big tariff debate in 1873, but I promise you in 100 years, no one is going to remember the big budget debate of 2011. That is people will yell and scream, it'll be on the front page of every paper in the country, and no one will care. But there's generally one thing that is going to define how our society does, and in my opinion, this is it. Because if we get this right, we will do a lot of things. We will innovate, we will change things, and it will be something that we achieve. It won't be something easy, but it'll be something that we definitely can do if we set our minds to it. And the question is, will we set our minds to do it? And when you think back to previous generations, you think back to, in my case, my parents' generation, my grandparents' generation, there were things that their generations faced that they remembered forever, and it was, how did you perform in that case? And that was the measure of how American society flourished. Because, they basically saw what the challenges were and, did a great job. And I felt as if, I didn't actually feel like, oh, poor me. I felt like, what a great chance. And that's what I would say to you guys is, what a great chance to see that you can make a difference where we will win this, and you can participate in doing something that we will think of as a great accomplishment together. And that's how I felt. I felt like I'd like to be part of that effort. I would like to, do as much as I can at, I'm 56 years old. I felt as if that's a great chance to participate in this and to try and full-time see whether I can't push this forward faster, and make sure that we win as soon as possible, because I think that winning soon is actually really valuable. I'm sure we'll win, but I think winning soon is really valuable. So we've done a bunch of things. We started a business group state by state to push for progressive energy policies, because I think, as I said, business voice is absolutely essential. We're doing a study, very localized, of the economic impacts in the United States, which is I'm doing with Mike Bloomberg and Hank Paulson. So once again, trying to make it nonpartisan, or in that case, tripartisan, because I think Mike Bloomberg has been a Democrat, a Republican, and an independent. And Hank Paulson is obviously a Republican. As a way of taking away the framework that it's either going to be jobs, good jobs, or the environment. That somehow there's a trade-off there. Our point is going to be, and I've seen a preliminary part of the study, our point is going to be no. Really, we don't have a choice. What is good for the environment is going to be good for the economy. And we've got to get away from the idea that we can't afford to innovate, we can't afford to be creative, we can't afford to do research. We have to go make sure we hang on to the jobs of the 1950s. That is actually not the strategy that is going to work for us. And I want to be able to quantify that as specifically as possible, because when people think about this, they think locally. People do not care on the East Coast, particularly about our drought. I mean, they're somewhat aware of it, and they're somewhat concerned, but people are very focused locally. So when you do national studies, that's really not that relevant. What's relevant is what you can show is going to happen in St. Louis, what's going to happen in Miami, what's going to happen in Fresno. That is actually what people respond to when they start to bring it home and think about what's going to happen to them and their family. So the other thing that we're doing that's probably taking most of my time is we have a political effort. And the reason for that is I basically tried to figure out why we're not, winning in this, why the normal American system that has worked so well for 200 years really isn't happening here. And I think there's been a lot of talk about whether there's scientific, really we need to figure out if this is happening and why. And I honestly think that that is like the smoking controversy. We're not sure if nicotine is addictive, and we're not sure if cigarettes cause cancer. There's a huge disinformation campaign on this, a couple $100 million a year, but it's, that is something that I honestly consider is pretty much settled. And it's also not a policy issue. The United States has done a pretty good job, almost exclusively in Republican administrations, by the way, of solving acid rain, hole in the ozone layer, and all of the other pollution problems. Pollution, from a policy standpoint, is not something that we've never dealt with successfully. It's not something that the people at UCSB could not figure out from a policy standpoint. They'd argue about the best way to do it. But the fact of the matter is, when we've put those policies in, American business and American science have responded faster, better, cheaper than anyone ever expected. And if you go back and look in the 1980s, when we put in these policies, everyone would forecast how long it would take, how much it would cost, and all the other stuff, and it was always faster. The innovations were always better than anyone ever expected, and they were what people didn't expect. So when we think about this, one of the things that I find ironic in this energy question is why the people who are supposedly representing American business do not trust American business enough to solve this problem, to innovate our way out of it, and really to come up with a whole bunch of research-based creative solutions that no one has thought of. That is the history of what we do. That's actually our competitive advantage. When you look around the world, that's what we do well, and I don't understand why the Wall Street Journal, which is a great newspaper and is the mouthpiece of American business, does not trust American business to solve these problems. It's actually ironic to me, and I honestly don't understand it. When we talk about things working well, this is actually a place where things are working really well, partly because it's in California, partly because it is almost the birthplace of modern American environmentalism because of the oil spill, and partially because the UC system is actually really progressive on energy. Janet Napolitano wants the whole UC system to be carbon neutral by 2025. We are actually, as a model of what we're trying to do from a research standpoint and from a behavioral standpoint, this campus, the UC system, Santa Barbara, California, actually is about as good as it gets. When you think about what environmental leadership and energy leadership looks like, it looks a lot like this campus in this town. So I actually think that is both something to be proud of, but it is also something to be confident about. Because the fact of the matter is, this isn't ending today. It's not like it's done. This is something that's going to go on for an extensive period of time in terms of changes, and it's something we should be super proud of, but also super ambitious about. Let me talk for 1 second, before we get to questions, about what's needed, because I hear a lot about the three things we need, which is technology, policy, and finance. That's what we need in order to really change the energy system in this country. And of course, all of them are true. And the United States is perfectly capable on all of them. But the question is, why are we not getting those three things? And in my mind, policy actually leads technology and finance. I mean, the easy one of those to talk about in Santa Barbara is finance. Because when you talk about energy finance in the United States now, people talk about basically getting beyond where there's enough money to a place where the risk is too high and people are unwilling to invest. And financial people in sort of progressive energy feel that this is a big structural problem. But as somebody who spent 30 years in finance, I think that is a misanalysis. Because from my point of view, there's way more money in the United States than is needed to solve this problem. The issue we have is this is a very different model from information technology, which is how all venture capitalists think about things. Information technology is infinitely replicable. Software is infinitely replicable. So you have to put in relatively small amounts of money. And if it works, you get a gigantic payoff. Most energy systems you actually have to touch. They're physical, they're not infinitely replicable, and the systems take a lot more money. And so as a result, the model of payoffs is completely different and has to be completely different. So if you think about I'm not sure you guys came here for a finance lecture, I'll try and do this quickly. If you think about a venture portfolio, the traditional way to think about it is if you have 10 investments, you want 2 of them to pay for the whole portfolio, 4 of them to be kind of okay, and the rest of them are zeros. And that works. But when you're doing an energy portfolio with a lot bigger investments, you really can't afford to have those gigantic losers, and you probably won't have those gigantic winners. So what you need is a much higher probability win with a lower payoff. And what that means is you need revenues when you start. You actually have to have contracts, and as a result, when people say you get to a certain size and people don't want to invest, they don't want to invest unless they have locked-in revenues. There's a ton of money in the United States. Interest rates are really low. It's not that the hurdles are too high. It's the way this is structured right now, and particularly if you're selling into a utility model, which is really slow, it's very scary for people to put up that kind of money. To me, that's a policy question, because if we get assured revenues, the money will be there without any question in my mind. And I feel the same way about technology. I know we have this is a huge business already. It's growing twice as fast as the American economy. We have more solar jobs than combined natural gas and coal jobs in the United States already. This business is growing fine. It will continue to grow fine. But for us to take it into a place where we start to accomplish the goals that we need, we actually need policy to change. We don't need policy to change for us to do fine. We need policy to change for us to have a revolution. And the example I will use is IT. Because between 1983, when we broke up Ma Bell, and 94 to 96, when we deregulated communications, we went through a complete revolution in terms of what happened. We had very good government investment, which is important from a research standpoint, because American business doesn't make huge 20-year investments with uncertain payoffs to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. But we also had a deregulated environment where people could innovate to their heart's content, and in fact have come up with a system that absolutely not only didn't exist, but no one had thought of 30 years ago. So when we think about what's going to happen in energy, the answer is we don't know. It's going to be way better and way faster and way cleaner and more successful than anyone in this room can imagine. And every time it happens 2 years later, we're going to be like, of course there's an internet. Of course there's a Google. Of course there's a Facebook. You know, you just start to think that was always written in the cards, but it wasn't. It was preceded by very good policy. So we looked at this, we looked at energy, and the Skoll Foundation does a map. And they basically break it down into science, policy, and politics. And they have every organization that they know of, and they put it on the map. And the size of the circle representing an organization is the size of its budget, how much they spend every year. Ton of good science organizations, a large number of exceptionally good and well-financed policy organizations, no politics. So the fact of the matter is, they did the work to say, where are there no organizations dealing with this? And the answer was politics. There really was, and if you think back in energy policy, there was no one pushing politically. So we thought, it's possible that that would be a place where we could make a difference, and where in fact, the problem was, because I see this as a political failure. I see this as an education, really an education of America issue. Because if you look, and it isn't even what you think, what you'd normally think. The polling is 2/3 of Americans basically, at some level, agree with what I just said. It's just that in politics, polling is not actually what matters. When you read the papers and you read about polls, people think that's what determines policy outcomes. But it isn't. What determines policy outcomes is votes. And what determines votes is importance and urgency, salience. So for instance, I'll give you an example. The example I like to use is gun control. 92% of Americans wanted background checks on guns last year. We did not get background checks on guns. That's with 70% of NRA members wanted background checks on guns. And we did not get background checks on guns. So if you think that polls are what drive American politics, that makes no sense. But if you think that salience and votes are what drive American politics, which is what I think, then it's very easy to understand what happened. Because the people who really, really don't want any gun control, that's their one issue. That's the only thing they vote on. And the 92%, that's an issue, but it's not one of the top 5. They're not going to change their vote based on gun control. And unless you're willing to change your vote, your opinion doesn't actually have any oomph for an elected official. They will try and do the right thing. I'm not trying to be too cynical. It's not as if I think that elected officials don't have, decency and ethics. But the thing that drives them professionally and politically is votes. And they want to feel like they're pleasing the constituents to the extent that they're going to change their votes. And so when you think about energy and climate, people agree with us, but they don't care. If you listed it in terms of what is your priority, ahead of it would be jobs and health and education. And that's why we haven't gotten the policy through. Not because people don't agree, but because the people care more on the other side than on our side. And so when you think about what has to change, what has to change is votes. What has to change is how much people care. They have to think that this is something that is important and that they have to change about. So that's actually the way that we think about it. We think that, we have to go into elections not only to figure out how to win those elections, but make the elections strategically count so that we get to a place where the policy changes. So the last thing I'll say is this. People think that we're having a terrible time politically in the United States. If you read the paper, you would think that we had hit a level of dysfunction that was historic and kind of shocking. And there is some truth to that. But there's not 100% truth to that, because the Congress of the United States is not the only elective body. It's not the only important body in the country. That's just how it's covered in the press. So if you think about what's happened in California since we have a federal system, not only do we have great energy legislation, but we're trying to hook up with Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia to create a carbon market. There are 9 states on the East Coast who have a carbon market, and where there are other states where we believe that they will join that. It's called RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Association. So the fact of the matter is, DC on a congressional level kind of is frozen. I mean, if you look statistically or any other way, you'd see that they find it very difficult to do things. But there are other parts of the system, and I think our administration has actually done a very good job over the last year on energy and climate. They are not looking at it politically. If you saw what they released today, if you see what they're going to release in June, if you listen to what they say and how they're treating it as a legacy issue where they have absolute need to do the right thing and not to put it in a political context, which is a change. But it's also true that the United States government is not the disaster that it's portrayed in the press. And let me say this. If you'll remember, as Californians, I always, when I am not in California, I'm obviously a proud Californian. I love California. But I don't want to be too snotty when I'm not in California, because I think people are jealous of us. So I try and pretend I'm a little more humble about it than I really am. And I always say, California, we like to lead. We went bankrupt before the United States went bankrupt. We couldn't pay our civil servants before the United States couldn't pay its civil servants. And we had less than a 15% approval rating for our legislature before you guys. So we like to lead. And hopefully that relaxes them a little about me. But the fact of the matter is, we're also coming out of it. And so the United States is going to come out of this too. And there are 2 ways we're going to come out of it. People are either going to loosen up on the partisanship and start to go back to our old model of looking at the problem together and compromising on the solutions, or the composition of Congress is going to change. And that's what's happened in California. We went from a place where everything I was joking about was true. We were dysfunctional. It cost us. I'm not saying it didn't cost us. It cost us a lot. You look at what happened to our educational system while this was all going on. It was expensive for California to have political dysfunction. It will be expensive. It is expensive right now for the United States to have political dysfunction in Congress, but it will not be forever. The things that I believe in this, one is I believe the private sector will solve this, ultimately when they get the framework right. Two, I believe in democracy. 317 million Americans, 37 million Californians are much smarter than we give them credit for. People pay attention much more than they get credit for. They think much more than they get credit for. So a dysfunctional system where the people get a right to throw the bums out does eventually happen. It happened here. It will happen nationally too. And the question is, how fast will it happen and how expensive will it be for us before that really happens? And the third thing I believe in is full cost accounting. Because when you think about this system, as a business person, I don't know what the right outcome is. At some level, I don't care what the right outcome is. What I want is for people to pay for their pollution fully and let businesses figure out the best way to deliver a commodity energy to all of us. You guys do not know what the source of your energy is when you get up in the morning and turn on the bathroom light. You have no idea. You have no ability to make that decision. Really, this is a system-wide issue where basically the system has to be set up right so that those decisions, when businesses make them, include all of the costs so they maximize the right thing. That is actually the way we'll optimize the best decision. If you don't include costs, then we will get the wrong answer. And the example I like to use is, if I have a garbage disposal company and I just take the garbage and put it in my brother's yard, which I would like to do and would not feel bad about. But if I did, and if you knew my brother, you would agree, but if you do that, I can have a really profitable business, but it makes no sense. And that's what's going on now. I should have to pay for taking the garbage and sticking it in his yard at some level. And when that happens, then I can compete with all the other garbage disposal companies. And that's what I'm talking about in terms of energy. As soon as I'm fully paying for my cost, I don't know if it's going to be the hydrogen car, which someone was touting me on today. I don't know if it's going to be flexible solar panels that you can paint on and that are incredibly cheap. You can put them on your window. Someone was telling me about that last Thursday. There are so many incredibly cool, great ideas, many of them at UCSB, from people, and a lot of them are going to work and some of them aren't going to work for reasons we haven't figured out yet. Maybe the flexible paint, when it hits by water, will wash away and be unusable. We don't know, but the fact of the matter is, once the framework is right, then we can let people innovate, then we can let people take their science, apply it, and try and turn it into big businesses. And that's actually how it's worked. So I have been running my mouth for a while and trying to talk to people about how to think about energy from the perspective of both how to do it right and how to do it in a way that we will be incredibly proud of ourselves when we're through. And let me say this. When I was growing up in New York, and it was in the 60s, and the best athletic team in the country was, as far as I was concerned, was the New York Yankees. And they were always, I know it's terrible. I agree. And the best player was Mickey Mantle, and he was a guy from Oklahoma who was basically a fall-down drunk. And no one in the Mantle family had ever made it to 40 years old because they were coal miners in Oklahoma. And so they were all the men would go into the mines and breathe the coal dust, and they'd die at like 38. So Mickey Mantle, he figured he was going to die, he might as well get drunk at breakfast. And he did. And when he was 54 years old, because you don't breathe coal dust in center field at Yankee Stadium, he said, if I'd known I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of myself. He was not a genius, but he was a great baseball player. But my point is this, and it refers to both the older people like me here and the younger people here, which is we should take ourselves seriously. We should take our responsibility seriously. You know, we are like Mickey Mantle in the sense that we have a great opportunity in my mind here to have a huge difference, that we can think of ourselves doing something important. And for the young people, let me say this. The old people here actually really care about what they're doing. You may not, I didn't believe it when I was in school. I figured the old people were trying to do as little work as possible and have as nice a life as possible, but it's actually not true. The people take it really seriously. They really want to do things that they feel proud about. And I have 4 kids between the ages of 20 and 26. And I know that they also are trying really hard to do things that they're going to be proud of and that they're going to look back at. And that is actually all we have to do, is we have to think that we have responsibility. I mean, we call our organization Next Gen, Climate Action, Next Generation. All we have to do is remember, in the case of Mickey Mantle, that we could be the greatest baseball player in the world. Because that is our opportunity. And if we do that, and we move up what we're trying to do, so we say this is something that will define our generation, then we will succeed in it. And when we look back, we'll take it, we'll be very proud. So I'll say one last thing, besides the fact that democracy is not a spectator sport. You know, this is famous. I would say 2/3 of you probably have heard this, but Winston Churchill always said, Americans always do the right thing after they try everything else. So we've tried virtually everything else at this point. So I think that it's time for us, honestly, to realize that we're going to do the right thing. I am absolutely confident we're going to do the right thing. And the sooner we do the right thing, the easier it's going to be to win, the less costly it's going to be to win, and the happier we're going to be when it's over. So with that, thank you.
That was great. Thank you very much, Tom, and thank you for all of your questions. I have lots of cards here, and I think more will be coming up. So I hope you've allocated at least till tomorrow morning to address these. So that was great. You talked a lot about how California is leading and the great things going on in California. But this is obviously a global problem. And for example, in the Wall Street Journal this morning, there was an article about the increase in exports of coal to Europe, I think.
Saw that. 5
times higher over just the last decade. So what should the U.S. do to solve this very global problem?
So obviously this is a global problem. This is not like normal pollution. So if there's air pollution in Beijing, the people of Beijing may not be able to go outside. You know, their lives may be shortened, their kids may be sick, but it really isn't going to hit people in Santa Barbara. But for carbon pollution, it's a worldwide issue. So there's no way that the United States can solve this by itself. Having said that, some people call the United States the indispensable country. There is no other, it's not like we're going to do it by ourselves. We're going to have to do this in conjunction with other countries, but they can't do it without us. So the reason that we're making such a public argument about this is we're going to have to go to China and have an agreement with them about how we're going to reduce our carbon dioxide emissions. We're going to have to go to the EU and have a deal. And if we're going to do that, we're going to have to do it publicly, and we're going to have to do it from a position of, I hate to say it, but moral authority. We're going to have to do the right thing first. So for instance, if we go to India and say, we have a huge problem, there's climate change, it's terrible, and we need you to help us. I know what they're going to say because they've already said it. They're going to say, we have 1.1 billion people, we're very poor, we have not caused any of the emissions so far, you are much richer than us, you do multiples of the emissions that we do, and you're asking us to solve your problem. Are you kidding? And they're going to be and have been extremely angry that we would come to them with that request, given our history, our position, their history, their position. So in terms of getting it right, we actually have to get it right here and then use our technology, our money, our moral leadership to go around the world and get the different countries to come along with us. And if we don't, you know, the old expression, you have to walk the walk. If we don't walk the walk, we can't walk into those we can't go into those negotiations and have any credibility. I mean, the fact of the matter is, for India, what they're looking at as the result of climate change is horrific. Those 1 billion Indians are staring at some really awful problems that, I mean, I could go into them with you, but you don't want to hear them. But trust me, the fact that they aren't responsible doesn't mean they're going to escape the problems. But for us to lead here, we have to be upfront. We have to deal with it internally so that we'll have the credibility around the world. And the next chance is going to be Paris 2015. So it's not that far off in terms of us having an opportunity to go and make agreements with different countries.
There's several questions on the whole free market capitalism system, and do you think the free market system is capable of adequately dealing with climate change, or is major government intervention needed? And if so, what form should it take?
Well, here's what I would say. Yes to both. It seems contradictory, but the fact of the matter is, you know, we're at a very funny time in American history. There is a minority of the country that has decided that government itself is a problem. So that if government fails, that's actually good. That anything that, you know, that obstructing government is good. There is no role. I was reading a Wall Street Journal op-ed which basically said government is the opposite of freedom. And so if we take that view, you know, there is no role for government. From my point of view, government has an absolute role. And if you think about IT, its role was to set a level playing field and then let businesses figure out how to execute once the playing field was level and fair. And that's always been, you know, we go right back to the 17th century or the 16th century in New England, and that, you know, every first-year economics student knows about the tragedy of the commons. If you don't charge people to put their cows on the common, everybody puts their cows on the common because it's free, and soon there's no grass on the commons. The reason you have a government is so you have rules for things like that. And that's what we need. And when we've seen, I'd say again, when we've seen those rules put in place, business is what executes the answer. So it's not as if we don't need a private sector, and it's not as if we don't need a government. We need both to serve their function, and they will. You know, I think that I'm confident in the private sector once the rules are right. But until the rules are right, they will optimize just the way they would if you could put your cows on the commons and the grass was free.
You attract controversy. I'll give you another shot here. So most scientists, some scientists I would say, feel the perceived danger of nuclear energy is greatly exaggerated, and nuclear energy could be a valuable bridge energy source. What is your view on nuclear energy?
I have heard this, and there are about 3 new nuclear technologies that a lot of people are talking about. The basic thing I think about nuclear is it's not cheap. You know, because of the way that people feel about the dangers, you can't produce kilowatt hours at a competitive rate from nukes right now. And there is one of the new technologies is such low-grade fuel that it can't be used for weapons. There's still a disposal problem. So when I look at nuclear, I get the point. There are no carbon dioxide emissions. I understand that that is a really good feature, but I have yet to see, and I would love it if you could have a safe nuclear program with no carbon dioxide emissions that produced safe, abundant, cheap kilowatt hours. I think it'd be great, but we haven't seen it yet, and people are spending money on it. But right now, everybody who's talking about it cannot site a plant and produce energy at a competitive price.
It goes back to innovation. Obviously, fusion produces much fewer, if any, byproducts than fission does. There's a company in Southern California, Tri-Alpha, which is doing fusion of helium.
Very familiar with it, have followed it for at least 5 years. If it happens, it's a game changer, would be awesome. I'm totally in favor of massive, safe, game-changing energy innovation. And if we get it, but all I'm saying is, I don't view the outcome as something we can preordain. All I want to make sure is that the rules and the playing field are fair, so that everybody can try their innovation and everyone can go up to the attic and their crazy Uncle George can see if he can come up with the thing that's going to work. Because someone's crazy Uncle George is going to, or maybe 1,000 Uncle Georges are going to. And so honestly, if Tri-Alpha works, it'd be fantastic. I mean, I know that's a game changer. And I know that, right now, it seems to work theoretically in the lab. That's the stage drive.
I'm getting a sign that we need to wrap up soon, so maybe for a last question, do you perceive second and third generation biofuels as a viable long-term alternative and sustainable energy source, as well as economically viable, both domestically and internationally? Also in relation to the inherent food severity issues they create.
Okay, so let's put this in an American context, and it's something that I don't feel that I'm the smartest person I'm sure I'm not the smartest person in this room. I know just enough to be dangerous, but I'll explain the context of that question, and I'm sure there are people who could answer it better than I. Basically, the question is this. In the United States, the biggest biofuel by far is corn-based ethanol. And traditionally, environmentalists hated corn-based ethanol because they did not think that it saved energy, they thought it took as much energy to create the energy as, the competition. They thought there was a huge subsidy involved, and that because the cost per BTU was a lot higher. And they thought that they were taking vast parts of our corn, economy, basically in the Midwest, and using it to create fuel instead of food. So there was a whole bunch of reasons why people don't like it. Now let me put that in the context of 2014. Price of corn per bushel is down a lot. There is no subsidy really. On a per BTU basis, it's pretty damn equivalent at this point, corn-based ethanol. If you talk to the corn growers and the big ethanol producers, which I have done, they would claim that basically it saves 30 to 50% on an energy basis. And the question there is, how much is the question you ask, which is, when you take those acres out of production of food and put it into fuel, what does it do to the food prices and the food availability around the world? That's really what this is coming down to. Now let's be clear about what we're taking out of production. What we're taking out of production is not food for human beings. The corn that we're growing in the Midwest of the United States is overwhelmingly corn that humans cannot eat. It's being fed to animals. So what we're really talking about is corn that's being used as feed for, dairy cows, beef cows, pigs. The food situation in the United States is also imperfect. And thinking about how we use our land in food production and what we grow and how we grow it and how healthy that is for Americans is also a very complicated question. So I started by saying I'm not the person who has the perfect answer on this. I've thought about it a lot. I've tried to talk to the people on both sides of this issue who are most knowledgeable, and I'm not exactly sure how to come down on it, honestly. The one thing, I did talk to these guys, and they were in Iowa, and they were talking to me about cellulosic ethanol, which means taking the stalks and grinding them up and using that. And they said, this stuff is just great. And I said, well, what does it cost per gallon of gas, on a BTU equivalency? $15. I was like, 15 is higher than 4. I'm sorry. They're like, no, this is great. I was like, so one of the things that's really true here is what we're going to do, there is the scientific ability to do it, and then there's the market test of can we produce this commodity energy at a price where it's going to allow us to continue to go forward. And I think a lot of people think we can't do both, but we can. And the fact of the matter is, when we give a market test is not a bad thing. Having to be able to do things where we include all the costs and basically say to ourselves, this is what you're allowed to produce in terms of CO2 emissions. That is the rule under which we can work, and we then maximize given that rule. And that is what American society can do really well. We just have to face up to the need to include all of our costs. And then when we do, all these individual questions will be competed against each other to deliver what we want to have. And that's why that is the framework for us to succeed in this. And we really need the political will to make those decisions. And for that, let me say this to the people in this room. Democracy isn't a spectator sport. This doesn't happen unless Americans do the things that they've traditionally done when there's been a big need, which is to vote, to register, to talk to each other, and to push. And if we don't do that, it definitely won't happen, because there are people on the other side who it is absolutely in their interest for nothing to change. And so I talked to a guy who runs a huge energy company, and he talked to me about that big pie chart. And he said, how much do you think it's going to change over the next 30 years? And I said, I gave him my opinion. And he said, I don't think it's going to change at all. We're going to be using the same percentage of coal, the same percentage of natural gas, the same percentage of everything. And I said, that's great. Doesn't change at all. We're completely screwed. So congratulations, you have an opinion. But that is actually what we need to do, is to push to make the change. And if it's not going to be someone else doing it. Unfortunately, it will have to be people like the people in this room, and specifically the people in this room. Because if we don't push, it is not going to happen. And that's actually why I quit my job, to push and to try and be one of the pains in the ass.
Well, I have to commend you. I think it is absolutely true that this is probably the most important issue facing the world today. And so devoting your efforts and NextGen's efforts to solving it is hugely important. So I hope you'll all join us outside for reception. And thank Tom again for all of his insights.
Thank you.